I wasn't supposed to hear the conversation. I'd come home early from my shift at the hospital, exhausted from a 12-hour rotation in the emergency room. The house was supposed to be empty, but voices drifted from my father's study as I climbed the stairs. The death certificate was the easy part, my mother said. Her voice was casual, like she was discussing grocery shopping. Once we filed it, the trust transferred automatically. No questions asked. I froze on the landing, my hand gripping the banister. How much did we get total? My father asked. 400,000 so far. The rest distributes over the next 5 years, but it's all ours now. Maggie's officially dead on paper. My legs gave out. I sat down hard on the step, my medical bag sliding from my shoulder. They were talking about me. My trust fund. The inheritance my grandmother had left me when she died 3 years ago. They declared me dead. What if someone finds out? My father asked, a hint of worry in his voice. Who's going to find out? Maggie barely talks to extended family. She's always working. No one questions anything. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. My parents had legally declared me dead to steal my inheritance. I sat on that staircase for 20 minutes after they left the study, my mind unable to process what I'd heard. Every interaction with my parents over the past year suddenly made horrific sense. Their insistence that I focus on my medical career and not worry about finances. Their dismissal when I'd asked about my grandmother's trust. Their suggestion that I let them handle all that complicated legal stuff. They'd been stealing from me the entire time. I went to my childhood bedroom and closed the door quietly. My hands shook as I pulled out my laptop and searched for my own death certificate. It took 3 databases before I found it. There it was, filed 8 months ago. Cause of death, car accident. Place of death, out of state. I was officially deceased according to the government. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, dinner at 7. Don't be late. I stared at the message, feeling sick. How could they sit across from me at dinner, knowing what they'd done? How could they look me in the eye? The answer was simple. They didn't see me as their daughter anymore. They saw me as an obstacle to money they believed should have been theirs. My grandmother had left the trust specifically to me, bypassing my parents entirely. That choice had clearly infuriated them. I texted back, I'll be there. I needed to be smart about this. Rushing in with accusations would only put them on guard. 3 days after discovering the truth, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Ms. Maggie Coleman? A professional male voice. Speaking. This is Thomas Jenkins, the executor of your grandmother Eleanor's estate. I'm calling to schedule a family meeting regarding the trust distribution. I sat up straighter. A meeting? Yes. There are some irregularities that need to be addressed in person. I've scheduled it for next Friday at 10 a.m. at my office. Your parents have already been notified. What kind of irregularities? I'd prefer to discuss that in person, Ms. Coleman. Will you be able to attend? Absolutely. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone. The executor knew something was wrong. This was my chance. Whatever evidence I gathered between now and that meeting could be the difference between justice and losing everything. I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Then I started planning. I spent the next 2 days in careful observation mode. I didn't confront my parents. I didn't ask questions. I simply watched and listened, becoming invisible in my own home the way I'd been invisible to them for years. My father worked from his home office, managing investments for wealthy clients. My mother volunteered at charity events and spent her afternoons at the country club. Neither of them seemed worried about the upcoming meeting with Mr. Jenkins. In fact, they seemed confident. The meeting is just a formality, I heard my father tell my mother over breakfast. Jenkins wants to make sure we've received all the distributions properly. Nothing to worry about. What about Maggie? My mother asked quietly. What about her? She has no idea about any of this. Even if she suspected something, what could she do? We have all the documentation. My mother laughed softly. I still can't believe how easy it was. One forged signature, one cooperative county clerk, and suddenly our financial problems disappeared. I poured my coffee with steady hands, pretending I hadn't heard. But I was recording everything on my phone, tucked in my robe pocket. Every word, every admission, every casual discussion of their fraud. They'd made a critical mistake. They'd gotten comfortable. That weekend, my parents hosted a family gathering. Aunts, uncles, cousins I barely saw anymore all crowded into our house for what my mother called a celebration dinner. I didn't know what we were celebrating until my father stood up to make a toast. To financial security, he said, raising his glass. And to Eleanor, who provided for our family even after her passing. Everyone drank. No one questioned why the celebration was happening now, 3 years after my grandmother's death. No one asked about my inheritance or why I wasn't being included in this toast to her generosity. My Aunt Patricia caught my eye across the room. She was my grandmother's sister, and she'd always been kind to me. The confusion on her face told me she didn't know about the death certificate or the stolen trust. After dinner, I cornered her in the kitchen. Aunt Patricia, when's the last time you checked on Grandma Eleanor's trust distribution? She looked surprised by the question. Oh, honey, that's not my business. Your grandmother left everything to you. Why do you ask? Just curious about the legal process. She studied my face. Is everything all right? I forced a smile. Everything's fine. Just trying to understand how these things work. But Patricia wasn't convinced. I could see it in her eyes. She'd noticed something was off. The next morning, I drove to the law office of Harrison Blake, a family friend who'd known my grandmother well. He was semi-retired but still took occasional cases. More importantly, he was someone I trusted. Maggie, he said warmly when his secretary showed me in. I haven't seen you since your grandmother's funeral. How are you? I need legal advice, Mr. Blake. Confidential advice. His expression shifted immediately. Tell me everything. I laid it all out. The overheard conversation. The death certificate. The trust distributions my parents had been receiving. Harrison listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, he sat back in his chair. This is fraud on multiple levels. Identity fraud, estate fraud, document forgery. Your parents could face serious criminal charges. I don't want them in prison, I said quickly. I just want what's mine. Maggie, I understand that, but what they've done is a crime. Once this comes to light, the legal system will be involved whether you want it or not. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I'd been so focused on reclaiming my inheritance that I hadn't considered the full consequences for my parents. How deep does this go? I asked. Harrison pulled up his computer. Let me make some calls. I'll need a few days to investigate the full scope. The family dinner that week was surreal. My parents chatted about mundane topics while I pushed food around my plate, knowing what they'd done, knowing they had no idea I knew. You're quiet tonight, my mother observed. Everything okay at the hospital? Just tired, I replied. Long shifts. My father set down his fork. You work too hard, Maggie. You should take some time off, enjoy life a bit. Hard to enjoy life without financial security, I said carefully. They exchanged a glance. My mother's smile tightened. You have your job. Your apartment. You're doing fine. I was just thinking about Grandma's trust. She left it to help me, didn't she? The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds too long. The trust is complicated, my father said finally. Legal issues. Nothing for you to worry about. What kind of legal issues? Adult things, my mother cut in, her tone dismissive. Focus on your career, Maggie. That's what's important. I nodded and changed the subject. But I'd seen the panic flash across their faces. They knew I was asking questions. They just didn't know how much I already knew. Under the table, my phone was recording again. Harrison called 3 days before the meeting with Mr. Jenkins. I've got the financial records. Maggie, this is worse than we thought. I met him at his office that afternoon. He spread documents across his desk, each one more damning than the last. Your parents have withdrawn $412,000 from the trust over the past 8 months. They've used it to pay off their mortgage, buy a new car, and invest in your father's business. Can we prove the death certificate was fraudulent? Already done. I contacted the county clerk who supposedly processed it. She has no record of any death certificate for you. Someone forged her signature and stamp. So we have them. We have enough to begin legal proceedings, yes. But Maggie, there's something else. He pulled out another document. Your grandmother's will included a clause. If anyone attempted to defraud the trust or manipulate its distribution, they would forfeit all rights to any inheritance and face immediate legal action. My parents aren't even supposed to have access to it? No. The trust was designed specifically to go to you and only you. Your grandmother was very clear about that. I thought about my grandmother, a sharp woman who'd built a successful business from nothing. She'd known my parents. She'd seen their financial irresponsibility. She'd protected me the only way she could. I drafted a formal letter to Mr. Jenkins that evening. Harrison helped me word it carefully, legally, with just enough information to put my parents on notice without revealing our full hand. To Thomas Jenkins, executor of the Eleanor Coleman Trust, I am writing to formally contest the current distribution of my grandmother's trust and to demand a comprehensive review of all financial transactions. I have reason to believe fraudulent activity has occurred regarding my legal status and inheritance rights. I respectfully request that all further distributions be suspended pending investigation. Sincerely, Maggie Coleman. I sent it via certified mail and email. My parents received a copy simultaneously. My mother called 15 minutes after the email went through. What the hell are you doing? Protecting my inheritance. There's nothing to protect. The trust is being handled properly. Then you won't mind an investigation. Maggie, you're being ridiculous. You don't understand how these things work. I understand fraud when I see it, Mother. She hung up. 10 minutes later, my father called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice cold and controlled. We need to talk. This behavior is unacceptable. You're embarrassing the family. I deleted it without listening to the whole message. My parents showed up at my apartment that night. I watched through the peephole as they knocked repeatedly, their faces tight with anger. Maggie, open this door, my father demanded. I stayed silent. We know you're in there, my mother added. We need to discuss this situation like adults. There's nothing to discuss, I called through the door. See you at the meeting with Mr. Jenkins. You're making a terrible mistake, my father said. Accusing us of fraud is serious. You could be liable for defamation. I almost laughed. I have evidence. Every conversation you thought was private, I recorded. Every document you forged, I've traced. Every dollar you stole, I've accounted for. The silence that followed was satisfying. You recorded us, my mother's voice was shrill. In our own home? In my home too. I still live there, remember? Or did you forget that when you declared me dead? I heard them arguing in hushed whispers. Then footsteps retreating down the hallway. After they left, I sat on my couch and let myself shake. Confrontation had never been my strength, but I just stood up to them for the first time in my life. It felt terrifying and powerful in equal measure. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. My parents stopped calling and started a different campaign. They contacted extended family members, painting me as unstable and ungrateful. My cousin forwarded me a message from my mother, Maggie is having some kind of breakdown. She's making wild accusations about the trust. We're worried about her mental state. Please don't encourage these delusions. They were trying to isolate me, to make me look unreliable before the meeting. It was a smart strategy, and it might have worked if I hadn't already spoken to Aunt Patricia and Harrison. Patricia called me that evening. Your mother sent me the strangest message about you having a breakdown. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm fighting back against fraud. I believe you. Your grandmother would be proud. That simple statement meant more than she could know. My grandmother had been the one person in my family who'd truly seen me, valued me, believed in me. Knowing she'd set up protections in her will prove she'd understood exactly who my parents were. I spent the evening reviewing my evidence one more time. Audio recordings. Financial documents. The forged death certificate. Testimony from the county clerk Harrison had interviewed. Everything was organized, labeled, ready to present. Harrison called the morning before the meeting. I found something. A clause in your grandmother's original will that your parents probably don't know exists. What kind of clause? If the primary beneficiary is declared deceased under fraudulent circumstances, the trust immediately reverts to a backup trustee who has full authority to investigate and redistribute funds. Your grandmother named me as that backup trustee. You? She approached me 6 months before she died. Said she didn't trust your parents and wanted safeguards in place. I didn't understand at the time, but now. He trailed off. Maggie, this means I have legal authority to freeze all trust assets and investigate the fraud independently of Mr. Jenkins. Why didn't you do that before? Because I didn't know about the death certificate until you told me. The trust administrator only notifies the backup trustee if specific conditions are met. Your letter to Jenkins triggered those conditions. My grandmother had planned for this. She'd known my parents might try something and had built-in protections I'd never known about. The relief I felt was overwhelming. What happens now? Now we go to that meeting and watch your parents' world fall apart. Harrison's private investigator delivered his final report the evening before the meeting. I sat in Harrison's office reading through findings that made my stomach turn. The death certificate had been created by someone with access to official document templates. The investigator traced it back to a county clerk my father played golf with, someone who'd been reprimanded before for documentation errors. My parents had paid him $5,000 to forge my death certificate and file it in the system. They'd then used that certificate to claim I'd died intestate, making them my legal heirs. Since I had no spouse or children, the trust transferred to them as my next of kin. This is premeditated fraud, Harrison said. Not a mistake or misunderstanding. Your parents planned this months in advance. Do we have enough to prove it? More than enough. The county clerk is cooperating with investigators in exchange for leniency. He's provided copies of the payment, text messages with your father, everything. I looked at the evidence spread across Harrison's desk. My parents weren't just going to lose the trust. They were going to face criminal charges. Are you prepared for what comes next? Harrison asked gently. This will destroy your relationship with them. They destroyed it when they declared me dead. I barely slept the night before the meeting. I kept imagining different scenarios, different ways my parents might try to explain away the evidence. But there was no explanation that could justify what they'd done. At 9:30, I drove to Mr. Jenkins's office downtown. Harrison met me in the parking lot. Ready? He asked. As ready as I'll ever be. We rode the elevator to the 12th floor in silence. The law firm of Jenkins and Associates occupied the entire floor, all polished wood and expensive art. The receptionist directed us to a conference room at the end of the hall. My parents were already there, sitting side by side across from Mr. Jenkins. They looked confident, prepared. My father wore his best suit. My mother had her courtroom smile ready, the one she used when she wanted to seem trustworthy and sympathetic. That confidence evaporated when they saw Harrison walk in behind me. What's he doing here? My father demanded. Mr. Blake is representing Ms. Coleman, Mr. Jenkins said calmly. And as it turns out, he's also the backup trustee for this estate. Please, everyone sit down. I watched my parents' faces as understanding dawned. They'd forgotten about the backup trustee clause. Or maybe they'd never known it existed. Mr. Jenkins opened a folder and pulled out documents. I called this meeting because of serious irregularities in the trust distribution. Ms. Coleman filed a formal complaint, which triggered an automatic review. This is ridiculous, my mother started. Our daughter is having some kind of episode. I have a death certificate on file for Maggie Coleman, Mr. Jenkins interrupted. Filed 8 months ago, claiming she died in a car accident. Based on that certificate, I distributed trust funds to you as her legal heirs. My parents said nothing. However, Ms. Coleman is clearly not deceased. She's sitting right here. He looked directly at them. Would you care to explain how this happened? My father recovered first. There must be some administrative error. We never filed a death certificate. This is the first we're hearing about it. That's a lie, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. I have recordings of you discussing the death certificate. Multiple conversations where you admit to filing it and using it to claim my inheritance. I pulled out my phone. Would you like me to play them? The color drained from my mother's face. That's illegal, my father said quickly. Recording without consent is perfectly legal in this state with single-party consent, Harrison interrupted. Maggie was present for all conversations she recorded. Everything is admissible. Mr. Jenkins held up his hand. Before we continue, I need to inform everyone that I've suspended all further trust distributions pending investigation. The funds already distributed will be subject to recovery proceedings. You can't do that, my mother protested. We're the legal heirs. You're not heirs if the beneficiary is alive, Harrison said. And since Maggie is very much alive, any funds you received through fraudulent death claims must be returned. I watched my parents process this. $400,000, most of which they'd already spent. The blood drained from my father's face as he calculated what this meant. This is absurd, he said, but his voice lacked conviction now. We'll fight this. With what money? I asked. The trust funds will be frozen. Your personal assets will be seized during the investigation. And that's before criminal charges are filed. Criminal charges, my mother whispered. Mr. Jenkins pulled out another document. Identity fraud, document forgery, estate fraud. The county prosecutor has already been notified. This is beyond civil litigation now. The room fell silent. My parents sat frozen, finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd done and what they were facing. There is one option, Harrison said slowly. Full restitution, immediate resignation of any claims to the trust, and cooperation with investigators. In exchange, we might convince the prosecutor to consider reduced charges. My father's hands trembled on the conference table. We don't have $400,000. Then you'll need to figure something out. The meeting ended with Mr. Jenkins scheduling a follow-up for the following week. My parents left without speaking to me, their faces ashen and defeated. Harrison and I stayed behind to discuss next steps. The county prosecutor wants to meet with you, he said. Your testimony and recordings will be crucial for the criminal case. How long will this take? Months, probably. But Maggie, the trust is yours now. All of it. Mr. Jenkins is transferring management to me as backup trustee, and I'll ensure proper distribution. I nodded, feeling numb. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the final death of whatever relationship I'd had with my parents. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. The prosecutor filed formal charges. My parents hired a criminal defense attorney. Their assets were frozen pending the investigation. I received dozens of calls from family members, some supportive, others angry that I was destroying the family. I blocked most of them. The only opinions that mattered were my own and my grandmother's, who'd set up these protections specifically for this situation. 2 weeks after the first meeting, Harrison called with news. We found more evidence. Your parents have been manipulating trust documents for over a year, before they filed the death certificate. He showed me forged signatures, altered beneficiary forms, falsified correspondence with Mr. Jenkins. They'd been planning this fraud for months, carefully laying groundwork to justify their eventual claim that I'd died. There's more, Harrison continued. They took out life insurance policies on you without your knowledge, listing themselves as beneficiaries. I felt sick. Life insurance? 3 separate policies, totaling $500,000. They were planning to claim those too, using the fake death certificate. The scope of their deception was staggering. This wasn't opportunistic fraud. It was calculated, systematic theft that would have continued indefinitely if I hadn't overheard that conversation. We presented this evidence to Mr. Jenkins and the prosecutor. My parents' attorney tried to negotiate, but the prosecutor was unmoved. The case was too clear, the evidence too damning. They're going to recommend prison time, Harrison told me. Your parents are looking at 5 to 10 years each. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I felt hollow. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom while prosecutors laid out the case against my parents. They looked smaller somehow, sitting at the defense table in clothes that suddenly seemed too expensive, paid for with stolen money. My mother cried quietly. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Their attorney argued for leniency, painting them as loving parents who'd made a mistake in judgment. The prosecutor countered with evidence. Recordings. Documents. Testimony from the county clerk who'd helped them. The judge listened impassively. When both sides finished, she spoke. This is one of the most disturbing cases of family fraud I've encountered. The defendants systematically planned to steal from their own daughter, going so far as to declare her legally dead. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, premeditated theft. She set a trial date for 3 months out and denied bail reduction. My parents would remain under house arrest, their assets frozen, until the trial concluded. As I left the courtroom, my mother caught my eye. Her expression was pleading, desperate. I looked away and kept walking. The weeks following the hearing were strange. I returned to my work at the hospital, but everything felt different. Colleagues who'd heard about the case treated me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity that I hated. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts, volunteering for difficult cases. Anything to avoid thinking about my parents or the upcoming trial. Aunt Patricia called regularly, offering support and updates on family gossip. Most relatives had sided with me once they learned the truth, but a few still believed my parents' story about making a mistake. Your grandmother would be handling this better than me, I told Patricia one evening. Your grandmother set up protections because she knew this might happen, Patricia replied. She'd be proud of you for fighting back. 3 weeks before the trial, my parents' attorney contacted Harrison with a plea deal offer. They would plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for 5 years probation, full restitution, and permanent estrangement from all family trusts. It's a good deal, Harrison said. They avoid prison, but they'll never access family money again. Do they have to pay back everything? Every cent, with interest. They'll be paying it off for the rest of their lives. I thought about it for 2 days before agreeing. I didn't want to sit through a trial, didn't want to relive the betrayal publicly. My mother requested one final meeting before the plea deal was finalized. Against Harrison's advice, I agreed to see her. We met in a supervised room at the courthouse, a neutral space with a guard stationed outside. My mother looked older than I'd ever seen her, her hair graying, her expensive clothes replaced with something ordinary. I need you to understand, she started. We never meant to hurt you. You declared me dead and stole my inheritance. How is that not meant to hurt me? We were desperate. Your father's business was failing. We were going to lose everything. The trust was just sitting there, and you were young, you had your career. So you decided I didn't need what my grandmother left me? She looked away. We thought we'd pay it back before you noticed. Make investments, rebuild the business, return the money. It was supposed to be temporary. $400,000. Life insurance policies. Systematic fraud over months. That's not temporary, Mother. That's theft. I know. Her voice broke. I know what we did was wrong. I know I failed you as a parent. But Maggie, we're still your parents. Doesn't that mean anything? I looked at this woman who'd raised me, who'd read me bedtime stories and attended my school plays and taught me to bake cookies. That person felt like a stranger now, separated from me by an act so fundamentally wrong I couldn't reconcile the two versions. You stopped being my parents when you declared me dead, I said quietly. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. The court date arrived on a cold October morning. The courtroom was mostly empty, just family attorneys, the judge, and a few observers. My parents stood before the judge and formally entered guilty pleas. The judge outlined the sentencing terms. 5 years probation. Full restitution of $412,000 plus interest. Community service. Permanent prohibition from accessing any family trust or inheritance. Do you understand these terms? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, my parents said in unison. Let me be clear, the judge continued. If you violate any aspect of this probation, you will serve the maximum prison sentence. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. The gavel came down. It was over. Harrison walked me out of the courthouse afterward. How do you feel? Empty, I admitted. I thought I'd feel victorious, but I just feel sad. That's normal. You lost your parents, even if they deserved the consequences. We stood on the courthouse steps, watching my parents leave with their attorney. They didn't look back. What happens now? I asked. Now you rebuild. The trust is yours, properly administered. You have financial security. You have your career. You have your whole life ahead of you. He was right. But it would take time before that felt like enough. The trust transfer finalized 2 weeks after the court date. Harrison handled everything, ensuring proper documentation and legal distribution. $412,000, plus the remaining distributions from my grandmother's estate, totaling nearly $600,000. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having. Money my grandmother had carefully saved and invested, meant to give me security and options. I paid off my medical school loans first. Then I bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, something that was mine completely. I invested the rest conservatively, following my grandmother's financial philosophy. Work continued at the hospital. I was promoted to senior resident, a position I'd earned through skill and dedication. My colleagues stopped treating me like a curiosity and started treating me like the competent doctor I'd worked hard to become. Aunt Patricia and I had dinner once a month. She shared stories about my grandmother, filling in pieces of her life I'd never known. Those dinners became my anchor, a connection to family that felt genuine and safe. I didn't hear from my parents. The restraining order I'd filed as part of the plea deal prevented contact, and I was grateful for the distance. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from my mother. It had been forwarded through attorneys, carefully screened to ensure it didn't violate the restraining order. Dear Maggie, I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. I'm writing to tell you that I understand now what we took from you. Not just money, but trust and security and the relationship we should have protected. Your grandmother was right to leave everything to you. You were always the strong one, the responsible one. We were weak and selfish, and we hurt you in ways I'm only beginning to comprehend. I hope someday you can find peace, even if you can never forgive us. You deserve happiness and success, and I'm truly sorry we tried to take that from you. Mom. I read it 3 times, then filed it away. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Maybe that was enough. Harrison called the next week with unexpected news. Your parents' restitution payments are ahead of schedule. They've been making double payments every month. How? Your father sold his business. Your mother took a job. They're living in a small apartment, downsized completely. They're actually trying to make this right. I didn't know what to do with that information. Their efforts didn't erase what they'd done, but maybe they showed genuine remorse. Time would tell. A year after discovering my parents had declared me dead, I stood in my new house's backyard, planting flowers in the garden. It was spring, and everything felt like renewal. My career was thriving. I'd been accepted into a fellowship program at a prestigious hospital. My finances were secure, carefully managed according to my grandmother's wisdom. My life was entirely my own. I thought about my grandmother often, wondering if she'd known how bad things would get, if she'd anticipated the exact scenario that unfolded. Her protections had saved me, her foresight had given me weapons to fight back. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't overheard that conversation, if I'd never learned about the death certificate. My parents would have continued stealing, would have continued believing their lies, and years of my life would have been built on a foundation of fraud. But I had heard it. And I'd fought back. And now I had something my parents had tried to steal: freedom. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Patricia: "Dinner next week? I have more stories about your grandmother." I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely." The sun was warm on my face as I worked in the garden, planting roots in soil I owned, building a life that was authentically mine. My parents had tried to erase me on paper, but I'd proven something important: I was stronger than their greed, smarter than their schemes, and more resilient than they'd ever given me credit for. The trust fund was mine. The house was mine. Most importantly, my future was mine. And that was the sweetest victory of all.